So, um, here we are. Good evening. I'm Metta Spencer in Toronto, and this is another in our weekly series of talks called Talk About Saving the World, where we talk about global issues of great importance. And I always invite someone interesting in on Monday evenings at 8 o'clock. And tonight we have two very interesting people. We have John Foster, who has authored a new book called Oil in Global Politics, which is going to be published, or it is being published by Lorimer Press in Toronto, and will be available in another couple of weeks. And you can buy it as an ebook as well. And say hello, John. John Foster, if you say hello, then they can see your face.
Okay, well, I would say to you, thank you so much for inviting me on your program, and hello to everybody else.
Good. Okay, and sitting beside him is his wife, Millie Morton, with whom I've been having a bit of a conversation because we're both sociologists. Yes. And she was giving me a little bit about her own history from a PhD at Cornell University to doing work on development issues over the years. And John is an economist, that's the word, energy economist, I guess, who worked at the World Bank. He worked at BP, he worked at Petro-Canada, I don't know where else. But at any rate, I think he's had a very illustrious career. And I ran into John, I believe it was 10 years ago, at a group of 78 conference in Ottawa. Both of us attended, and he was telling me about his interest in pipelines and of the importance of understanding the motivations of various countries to protect their energy assets abroad, in explaining a lot of things, including the war in Afghanistan. So I asked him to write an article for us, Peace Magazine, about this very important, interesting issue, and he did so about Afghanistan. So now, hello, John, and can you tell us where you went from there? Because I'm very interested. I found it fascinating that, in fact, I'll ask Millie first, because I know that you were in on the emergence of this piece of research. And I think he kind of became a bit of a detective in finding out who had interests in this gas pipeline in Afghanistan. Is that right? Tell us about how that happened, Millie.
Well, we often discussed foreign affairs, and we were discussing Afghanistan, struggling to figure out why was it so important after the war began. And this was in 2006, when 21 Canadians had lost their lives in a couple of months in the fall of 2006. And so we said, well, we better figure out what is Afghanistan all about. But none of the reasons we found in government websites or other things that people were saying seemed to make sense to us, with both of us having a background in international development. And I had done a lot of work in Africa. So I knew what it was like to be a very poor country like Afghanistan. And in the course of our discussions, we remembered that in the mid-90s, the Taliban had been honored guests in Washington, in Houston, and that the US government was trying to help UNICAL in its effort to get a pipeline project going in Afghanistan from Turkmenistan, one of Afghanistan's neighbors in the north, through Afghanistan to Pakistan and India.
Now, excuse me, this was the US government was trying to get this to happen, but it hadn't happened, right?
No,
it was all negotiations.
In the mid-90s, they were trying to do this, and then there were protests from the women's movement because the Taliban were misogynists, And following that, Bill Clinton decided not to proceed with being involved, and Unocal dropped out. But in 2006, I said, what about the pipeline? Do you think it would still be somebody would be still trying to make it happen? And John said, oh, no, I think that's dead. But if it's ongoing, there will be something happening in the Asian Development Bank. And I can look in their website and probably find it. So
I went and delved away. It was certainly not listed on any country project, not any one of those four that Millie has just mentioned. It turned out to be a regional cooperation project of with a grant or a loan of $3 million US. It was for a feasibility study. They were certainly actively interested, and that I would say whetted our appetite. We found that the four countries were cooperating in regular meetings on the pipeline at ministerial level. They had a steering committee that would meet. We found that US officials were present at those meetings and the ADB. And we found that
I'm sorry, this was, you're looking at a history already. This is something that had been going on in the 90s. And we're talking now about you're doing this investigation in what, about 2008 or when?
2006, 2007, 2008. We became very interested in this, what on earth's going on in Afghanistan because of the war. And we dug back and found that, yes, there had been a project proposed way back in the 90s by this American company called Unocal, by a rival company in Argentina that finally lost out. Mm-hmm. And so I thought, well, this project must be dead. But in delving away, we found, in fact, no. The project was very much being planned. The US were pushing it. And in aid meetings that took place in 2008, 2010, and later, where huge aid coordination groups with representatives from Canada. This project was one of the you call it key projects in the program.
As aid, it was considered aid.
Would you speak to that?
Well, when the Asian Development Bank has a project, they have, pipelines take a long time. They might be negotiated and efforts might be made to work on them for many years, even 20 years or 30 years before anything happens. And so in this case, there was a lot of effort, a lot of money going into meetings and negotiations to try to get the four countries to work together to get this project underway. Meanwhile, there's fighting in Afghanistan. The pipeline is supposed to go through Helmand, where the British are. It was supposed to go through Kandahar, where Canadians were. And nothing was able to happen because there was so much fighting going on. But
let me ask you just a more general question. What do you see as the connection between the war and the plans for this pipeline? Are you saying in any sense that the motivation for the countries that were part of or supporting the Asian Development Bank, that they were in the war in order to defend their interests?
It's a difficult question.
As developed this pipe or gas pipeline, or is this something? Pardon, Sir John.
I'll start with the United States. They were very explicit in 2008 that they wanted to link Central Asia strategically with South Asia, and a physical way of doing it was this particular project. They wanted to see the resources of Turkmenistan, which has the world's fourth largest reserves of natural gas, go south. At that time, the resources were flowing through a pipeline through Russia to Europe. The Chinese wanted to build pipelines and did, that would take this resource all the way to Shanghai. The Americans wanted to see the resources go down to India because, rather like in Canada with the railway across Sir John A. Macdonald and all that, the railway across Canada binds the provinces together. So in this case, the pipeline would bind together the countries you see on the screen, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and into India, which is very much a U.S. strategic aim. In other words, to link these countries that way, stop them drifting towards Russia or China.
And pipelines bind countries together.
Go ahead, Millie. Sorry.
Pipelines bind countries together because you have to agree that you're going to invest in this and receive from this for a period of, say, 50 years. So it's not easy. Once it's established, there is a vested interest of all the countries in keeping in close touch and good friendship.
We see that.
Now let me leap into this inference. You're not saying it's because it's not that the U.S. and all the other countries were doing this because they particularly craved this gas themselves or needed it, or but rather it was a part of a plan to bring these countries together for some notion of what the world should be like politically. Is that what we're saying? You're not reducing it to an economic interest, but rather a political game plan. Is that right?
Sure. I'll have a go at that first, if I may. Way back at that time, Afghanistan was being treated as if it was an island in our newspapers. All the emphasis on Kandahar, taking girls to school, that kind of stuff. And very few people knew, and it was not talked about, who were Afghanistan's neighbors. To my mind, that you don't understand a country if you don't know who's next door, Canada or United States. And in the case of Afghanistan, it has neighbors of Iran, which is very much in the American, we call it, in their sights. You have China joining it, of course, Pakistan. But to the north, you had these stands, Turkmenistan and others, and with that, the gateway into Central Asia, above which is Russia. So, to my mind, it had to be seen as a bridgehead.
Yeah, and over the course of the war, the U.S. has built massive bases, like I think 9 or more in Afghanistan, and they don't seem to have any plans to leave those bases. They don't have a history of leaving countries once they are entrenched. And so they're now located much closer to China and Russia than they were in the past. From that,
the idea is to try to build linkages that would make sure that Afghanistan and these other countries would be in the orbit of the U.S. and I guess some of the other Western European countries. Is that right?
Yes, and I think we see that in the reverse with Ukraine, for example, which is the gateway for Russian gas going to Europe, where the game there is to somehow break the Russian gas going through to Europe, substituting American gas.
Okay.
Well, I'm not trying to get off Afghanistan. I'm just saying there are.
But I know that you have.
There are always parallels.
And we're not saying that the pipeline was the whole story.
By no means.
By no means. It's part of what's going on. There were other efforts to link Central and South Asia also.
But you have gone on, and your work has built on your early research on Afghanistan, and you've looked in other parts of the world where pipelines are crucial as part of a geopolitical strategy. And this, I found, you sent me, thank goodness, a map of Ukraine that shows some pipelines going through there. My goodness, it looks quite like a lot of lines. I don't know. What are these? Are these competing? Or these are just, I guess, are they competing, or are they all run by Russia?
These are all lines from Russia going by one route or another into Europe. Most of those lines are going through, the big ones are going through Ukraine. You'll see one to the north that's shown going through, I was going to call it Belarus and Poland. Into Germany. And you can see one that's crossing the Black Sea into Turkey. It's called Blue Stream. So, but historically, most of Russia's gas to Europe went through the Ukraine. It's not surprising. It was all part of the Soviet Union when these were built in the 1960s, 1970s.
Here's I found one that you sent me to. Let's see if we can share this one of the Black Sea. What is this one?
Yes,
are these, excuse me, are these oil or gas pipelines, or which are more important, actually?
These are gas.
These are gas. And do they send oil pipelines to Europe from Russia?
Most of the gas, as I understand it, on that, much of the oil out of Russia gets exported from the eastern end of the Black Sea by tanker. And so the great geopolitical battle going on right now pertains to the natural gas pipelines coming out of Russia and into Europe. The game being that the relations between Russia and Ukraine right now are so abysmal that from the Russian point of view, they being a petrostate, which is reliant upon oil and gas for much of its foreign exchange and for quite a 40% or more of its government revenue, to be dependent upon the whims of a hostile country, which is lined up with the United States, is from a Russian point of view perilous to the state of the nation economically. So two major ways of avoiding the gas going through Ukraine are to build pipelines, strategic pipelines to the north and to the south, so that will bypass Ukraine. So the first one you looked at, you showed, was the route through under the Black Sea to southern Europe. The one you're now looking at is Nord Stream, which goes from Russia down the Baltic into Germany, and the one which is shown in green on the screen is built just a very few years ago. It's huge. And the one in orange is called Nord Stream 2. It's pretty well the same, you see a slightly different point of departure out of Russia. And it is right now the scene of intense rivalry, where Germany wants that line. Certain European companies in partnership with Russia's Gazprom, the big Russian gas company, want it, including Shell. But the Ukraine, of course, is dead against it, because it would lose very, very much of the gas in transit through its country, and with that, $2 billion worth of foreign exchange every year. And Poland is against it, because the Poles too have a pipeline going from Germany from Russia through to Germany. The Americans don't want it, because they want to export LNG from the United States into Europe. And this is a very, very new game which has developed because of fracking. They have suddenly come out of nowhere to be an enormous producer of the world's biggest producer of oil, and and a major producer of gas for export. So the Brits are trying to break it too. So you have a game.
No, excuse me, but the yellow line, this Nord Stream, is it doesn't exist yet, right? And it's being planned, and there are fights about whether it shall exist. Is that what you're saying, or is it already in progress?
Okay, well, I'll speak to that. There's two pipelines. The first is being built. It's called Nord Stream 1. The second one is planned, and the Germans are now constructing the link. They're building the facilities on shore to bring it in, and to where the German through German territorial water. The Russians are doing the same at their end, and the only thing that's now missing is the big pipeline between. The ship is ready to start laying the pipe. What has been holding it up is getting permission from the countries which adjoin the Baltic on the north side, get their permission for the line. And this has been given by Finland, by Sweden, but not by Denmark, with some pressure from the United States to go through their territorial water. But it can go through their economic exclusive zone and from there into Germany. So that is likely what is going to happen.
Okay, now this is gas still. We're not talking about oil, right?
Very much gas.
And almost all of these pipelines you've mentioned so far are gas, not oil.
That's correct.
Now, how important is gas compared to oil? You know, we hear, people in the street chanting "No blood for oil," as if, the Iraq War was caused by a desire to acquire Iraq's oil. But you don't hear people chanting "No blood for gas." And I guess I'm not sure, in terms of the economy, how important is gas compared to oil?
That's a really interesting question. I've not heard it put so directly. I like it. Originally, gas was the Cinderella fuel, the one dressed up and nobody wanted to have. It got burnt, it flared at the field. Then it started to be used very much in Canada and the United States. Europe cottoned on. Now it's a very developed gas economy. The Chinese want gas very much. What it gives them compared with oil, compared with coal, is as far as fossil fuels go, it's the least harmful to the atmosphere in terms of emissions. So that makes it a very, very, very much wanted fuel.
Wait a minute. I want to stop you there because you just said something I'm surprised by, and I'm not sure I believe it, frankly.
Go on.
Methane is very dangerous. It's shorter term. I don't think it continues as long, but I think methane actually is in the short term a more dangerous greenhouse gas in terms of carbon emissions and so on than CO2. So please, let's sort this out. You say that gas is less dangerous?
I was saying that burnt gas is less dangerous. The methane is before it's burnt.
Oh. So
if that stuff gets into the atmosphere, my understanding is very much yours, that it's harmful.
Mm-hmm. But burned gas, now what happens after I don't know what happens after you burn methane.
You get CO2.
See, you emit CO2 from the methane, is that right?
That's correct. But you're getting less CO2 emissions than if you had been burning coal or oil sand, bitumen, or heavy fuel oil, these kind of things from which the Europeans are able to meet their Paris Agreement targets, very much by switching over to wind, of course, and solar, but also as far as fossil fuels go, to natural gas and away from coal. The Chinese do it because they're cities are almost unlivable in terms of pollution.
Mm-hmm.
The air quality
so if we are talking about actually burning the methane, that's better for the environment than gas or petroleum would be then.
Well, they're all hydrocarbons, but it's the least harmful.
But it would be the least harmful. But then there are other kinds of risks that, as I understand it, go with methane extraction, and that is leakage and other, if the methane gets contaminates the water supply and that sort of thing. But I guess that's not your concern in this book. So I'm dragging you off topic a little bit, but only out of curiosity about what the effects are for the environment of using these things. So go back where you were. Okay, so it's the Russians eager to export gas to Europe, which does not have enough gas of its own. And now there's a fight between Russia with this desire to put these new pipelines in, and the US wanting to send its fracked liquefied natural gas to Europe. And they're sort of in competition. Is that the way to look at it?
I would say that Europe does have gas. It has the North Sea. The North Sea gas and the North Sea oil both are declining in their output. And that's a great preoccupation in Britain and Norway and in Denmark and in the Netherlands. There is gas that's imported into Europe from North Africa, from Libya and from Algeria and from even from Nigeria by ship. But the biggest import source is by far Russia, because it has the world's largest reserves of natural gas. The next country in line is Iran, so much more than Canada.
Okay.
So that's part of the tale. So what is Germany doing about it? They've been importing Russian gas and Russian oil since the 1960s. This was of enormous concern to the United States, who opposed it on grounds of energy security. You can't trust the Soviets, or the Soviets will get too powerful by the development, by the foreign exchange they get from that.
But the U.S. wouldn't have had any stake in the dispute, because the U.S. was not then in a position to export its fracked gas, right?
This is very new. Only in the last couple of years or so have these exports started. Before that, the United States was importing LNG. But what's interesting to me is that the United States and Europe, through the European Commission, coordinate their energy policies for Europe very, very closely. The United States is all in favor of, in its support for Ukraine, for the Russian gas to keep passing through Ukraine as a source of foreign exchange to the Ukraine. Mm-hmm. Is not in favor of Russia having these alternative routes. Mm-hmm. The European Commission's view is that it would like to see alternative sources of gas, new gas coming into Europe, not from Russia. And what they are looking at is gas from the Caspian Sea through to Turkey. There's a southern corridor, they call it, to bring gas into Europe, that route, for which the British government is very keen, because it's BP that is the lead operator of that pipeline that's currently being built, all the way to Italy from the Caspian Sea, from Azerbaijan. There's other gas in the Eastern Mediterranean, which is Israeli gas, and offshore Cyprus. And that's gas which interests the United States to come into Europe.
Now, that's new to me. I never heard of that gas.
That's new.
It's in the Mediterranean and it's owned by Israel?
Israel, the deposits look like they're certainly offshore Israel. They're developing them. Some of that gas already comes into Israel. It's offshore the Gaza Strip, which of course makes an interesting geopolitical tale as to why Israel would want to control the situation.
And I presume then that the Palestinians have other ideas about who should own that gas.
I haven't talked to them, but I would surmise you're correct.
Mm-hmm.
There's also offshore Cyprus. There's offshore Lebanon, this gas, but that's not yet developed, but is known. Mm-hmm. But I'd like to lead to another source of gas we haven't talked about, to Europe, which has not yet happened, but was intended to happen, and that is gas that will come to Europe through Syria. And there we are. Syria is very, very much in our news this week with the northwest province of Idlib under attack or liberation, depending which way you care to look at it. Mm-hmm. And yes, that's it. So what we have here, certainly not in our newspapers, unless you've seen it, and I've been blind to it, you see two competing pipeline schemes to Europe. The one in blue was announced by Qatar in 2009. It would go through Saudi Arabia and then cut up into Syria and then into Turkey. So the Turks had their eye on the transit fees that could happen through that line. Qatar is the world's third largest supplier, has the world's third largest reserves of natural gas. 2 years later, in 2011, in May, Iran announced another route. It also is the number two reserves of natural gas. And it would like to take a route to Europe, as you see in red. So it would go through Iraq and Syria, but would not go through Turkey. 1 month later, the uprising, or whatever it is, in Syria took place. And with the, gosh, if I dare say it to you, with the special forces of Western countries already in place, the Turks were angry at that pipeline from Iran, and of course the United States too, which has a massive base. Its largest in the Middle East is in Qatar. So with the war that's been happening in Syria, neither of those schemes has gone anywhere. Mm-hmm. But the areas within Syria, which you can see there, and these are really approximate routes, we don't know the precise routes, are those where US troops are ensconced. The Russians have been supporting for the regaining of territory through in central Syria, through which those pipelines would pass. It's a hidden game.
Well, now I didn't realize how surreptitious all of this was. It's true that I don't read the economics section of the newspaper very much anyway, and I can't claim to be on top of this, but I don't think all of this is publicized very well. And I wonder why. It does seem to me, I do know this much, that it is illegal, contrary to international law, to launch a war for resources. And I wonder if some of the major playing countries in these disputes, if you want to elevate them to the term disputes, competitions maybe, are they being cagey about disclosing their intentions or their concerns, lest they be accused of launching an illegal resource war? I think of, for example, the U.S. was, of course, accused of attacking Iraq in order to get hold of its oil, and everybody seemed to deny that and want to downplay that as a reason for the war. What do you make of this fact that we don't hear much about the intentions of the countries that are competing for these various pipelines?
I think you've put that question in a beautiful fashion. This is the way I see it, is that, of course, under the UN Charter, wars for resources are illegal. And so no Western minister is ever going to, or any country is going to say that they went to war for resources. In fact, I once heard a Canadian, won't name him, defense minister, at the time of 2005 or 2006, say, we're not there for the resources. But I looked at the transcript the next day of the CBC, and the phrase was missing. So,
well, what does that mean? He deleted it, or the CBC did, or what?
I never asked them, but I spoke to my wife. I said, "Look, it's missing from the transcript. Did you hear what he said? What did he say?" And she told me, "We're not there for the resources." So. And I heard a similar comment made by an unfortunate Australian foreign minister for why Australian troops were not in Iraq. So, on the other hand, yes. So I think the reasons for all these interventions, which are never called war, they may be called missions, which makes our troops missionaries, is. When I was at the World Bank, we always went on missions, so we were missionaries. When I was at the Inter-American Development Bank in Espanol, we were all missionarios. So we have the same now as in an armed sense. And so they're going there to do good things. And they're going to help democracy, or they're going to help reduce the poppy trade. They're going to take girls to school, help women's development, and so forth. And all the aid, what can I call the aid brigade will move in on this basis, and the NGOs will play. They all have a vested interest in that, but nobody's talking about the overall game. What was interesting in the case of Afghanistan was that after having been the pipeline was underground, if you like. In 2011, it actually went public when Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State, and she suddenly announced in India a new Silk Road, was what she said, to India from Central Asia to link the countries together. And the flagship project for that was going to be this TAPI pipeline. So I thought, golly, yes. And then they started to, as diplomats.
Sorry, we need to explain TAPI. T-A-P-I, I understand it, but we're referring now to this pipeline that we started off the conversation with about taking it from Turkmenistan through Afghanistan, Pakistan to India, right? Yes. T-A-P-I, TAPI.
Yes, forgive me for throwing an acronym in unexpected conversation. You're right. So,
and that was going to be part of the Silk Road?
That is what Hillary was saying, and this has never been gainsaid. But certainly the US has tried to get, these diplomats have tried in Houston to drum up interest on the part of the US oil companies to take part in the pipeline, thus far unsuccessfully. Yeah.
Well, I can only think of one exception to the generalization that people disguise their motivation if in fact they are motivated to get energy from other countries as part of their world strategy, and that is Michael Ignatieff. I believe I was at a conference or a talk that he gave, maybe at the Monk Center a few years ago. It was while the I think it was before he even ran for, got involved in politics in Canada. But he said, well, can you imagine why any country would ignore the resource needs of its people? That everybody has to have energy. And naturally, foreign affairs are managed with a view to being able to have access to the energy that the country needs. He didn't say that that's why they attacked Iraq, but you could put the two sentences together and they wouldn't necessarily contradict each other.
I think Henry Kissinger has said something on those lines. Of the country that controls the oil controls the region, that kind of thought. I found it interesting to take these eight or so countries where there have been interventions or war missions, and to look at it from the point of view of the resources. And I find it could break out like this. About 3 or 4 of those countries have oil where you really wonder whether that was what it was about. Iraq, Libya, currently a completely failed state destroyed by NATO, and Iran, where the current US embargo is coming into place. The intent is to stop all exports out of Iran and basically bring the country down. Venezuela. So you have these countries. They're all oil producers. That's where the squeeze is. You have a second group of countries, which are ones through which pipelines go. They're transit countries. Because worldwide, there's this enormous transfer of energy from one part of the world to another, either by ship or by pipeline. Most of the world's energy, oil goes by ship.
I want to show you, if I can, that very thing, because you sent me a very interesting map that.
Oh, good gracious! That's the point I wanted to make. Coming up.
I know that.
Well, I think there's a bit of telepathy going on here. So the third group of countries are those which are countries past which the energy flows by ship. And so what you see here, this is a US agency, International Energy Agency map. Forgive me, it's the Paris, the International Energy Agency, but it's published by the US Energy and Information Agency. It's showing what they call choke points. These are areas which are pretty narrow through which shipping has to pass, where it's at risk. And one you can think of immediately, it's so obvious, is the Straits of Gibraltar. But what you're seeing here is the Suez Canal. Take the route from Iran. Let's start it this way. Much of the world's seaborne oil, 30% or more, comes out of the Persian Gulf, and it's coming out past then a very, very narrow part of the Persian Gulf between Iran and Qatar. It's the Straits of Hormuz. Then the oil going to Europe would then have to go through what they call the Mandab Strait and then the Suez Canal. There are other choke points going to China. And so
the Malacca Strait is a tight squeeze too, isn't it?
The which one?
Malacca.
Yes, that's exactly right. For which only a certain size ships can get through. They're sort of Malacca dimension ships. So much of China's import. China's now the biggest importer of oil worldwide, and overtaking the United States a couple of years ago. And so its oil from the Middle East, which is the major source, has to go through down the Straits of Malacca, which is between Malaysia and Sumatra, part of Indonesia, round through Singapore, then up into the South China Sea, where the United States has a fleet of ships. The Brits now have ships floating around there, and there's a contest for control, for mastery of the South China Sea. From an American point of view, they say that they're insisting on the freedom of navigation. The Chinese say everybody's free to navigate; it's not a problem. And they see a risk to them of a potential blockade on the energy that would go into their country, because a country without modern fuel, petroleum, is dead in the water. China's done a lot about this. So you have this game the petroleum game between China, the United States, and this Russia, where Russia and China are now thrust together. China's so concerned about the risk for these choke points that it is importing more and more from Russia by new pipelines being built of gas and oil. It's also avoiding the Straits of Malacca by two new pipelines that go across Myanmar or Burma, which is so much in our news because of the Rohingya people. These pipelines happen to go through the Rohingya territory.
So these are real pipelines. They're not, some of them you're talking about planned pipelines, and I can't tell which ones are real and which ones are fantasies.
Forgive me. The ones through Myanmar are for real. They opened about 2 or 3 years ago.
Oh.
The ones from Russia, the oil pipelines to China are for real. There are two huge ones planned from Russia, from Siberia into China. One is almost ready, it's almost built. The other is still being planned. So that's about the name of the game there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember when they made that deal, what was it, 5 or 6 years ago, China and Russia. And what I was reading said that Russia got I guess they were desperate and they would sign anything to get some money. But apparently the price that they were going to get for their oil from China was not, not what they would look for. It was like they settled for a very bad deal, I guess, out of desperation. Is that do you follow the price of oil and how important that is in the status of a country?
I follow the price of oil in a general sense. The very specific oil prices within deals like the one you mentioned, I wouldn't have the remotest idea, because typically they're not published. And you have to rely upon somebody leaking or somebody saying it or somebody inventing it, whatever. The prices from the Middle East too to China, in my understanding, are discounted. Right now, the Iranians are having to discount to get their oil into China because of this forthcoming embargo in November of the oil sanctions on China, on Iran. Yes.
How much do you observe the effect of the price of oil or the profit of these deals? How much does that affect the security of the regimes? I remember there was a time when Gorbachev was in power, and he was really desperate because oil was selling for, I think, $7 a barrel, the Russian oil. And of course, under Putin, when he's been so popular, it was up to what, 130 or something in that vicinity. How and people that I talked to said that that explains what a country is able to pay for internally and how happy they are able to keep their citizens by giving them luxury items and making life easier by way of pensions and so on, and therefore that has a lot to do to explain the popularity of the government and of the day. Is that part of your book or not?
Yes, I do talk about the price of oil in somewhat in that sense in the book in several places. For example, when it comes to Russia, when it comes to Venezuela. I don't go into the Canadian story because that's another game in its own right. What I would say is this, and I did say it in the book, is how important perceptions are in decision makers, whether in national capitals, in governments, or in oil companies. So in the early 2000s, there's a very different perception than today. At that time, the perception was of peak. The concern was peak oil. And with that, the fear that oil production was peaked and worldwide and it was going to go on the decline, and how to get around that issue. My belief is that this was a motivation, but of course, as Millie was saying earlier, you never know people's motivation. This is a guess at it. A motivation for the American invasion of Iraq. Nothing to do with weapons of mass destruction, of course, which didn't exist, and they knew it. But Iraq has an immense amount of undeveloped oil resources, and the potential, it was thought, to increase its oil production to rival that of Saudi Arabia. And at that time, that was really wanted. Today, since moving a bit on that line, that is also the reason why, as I recall it from my Petro-Canada days, the oil sands were being developed, the high Arctic for gas, offshore areas, difficult offshore, deep areas, and so forth. When oil was going up to now in the 2000s, $100 a barrel, then, as you say, one almighty drop. The West Texas Intermediate went down to about $23 a barrel, or something like $27 a barrel, something like that. And with that, it really pulled the rug from underneath these projects. And so then the different cost level of producing oil started really to matter. Coming to Russia, it has some of the cheapest, the lowest costs worldwide. So my old stamping ground at BP invested in Russia big time. It has a 25% stake or so in Russia's largest oil company, Rosneft. And the US fracked oil is also fairly low cost and resilient to these ups and downs of oil price. Of course, the Middle East in general is low cost, very. Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, Iran, and Iraq. The North Sea needs a certain amount of price support to make it work well. But in Canada, we have an issue. And that is, first of all, the offshore on the east side, Hibernia and those kind of fields need a fairly high price to make them profitable. The oil sands are in trouble. And so the major producers of the major foreign companies that were in there have been either have pulled out or have declared their intention of pulling out, leaving 3 or so in place. But that comes into a very different tale, which is the Trans Mountain, Energy East, and that kind of tale, which is not where I was focusing in the book.
Yeah. Okay.
But that's not meant to be a cop-out.
Well, no, I understand it's a different story. But now let's think about the future, because now, as you mentioned, 10 years ago, the fear was that there was going to be peak oil, which means that there was going to be a shortage of oil. And I had friends who told me that today, we would all be freezing in the dark and starving in Canada because, all the oil would be gone. And I didn't believe it at the time. But at the same time, I wonder if I kind of think now that there seems to be an abundance of oil. My guess is that, and you can tell me whether this is true, there's going to be stranded assets that the countries that are investing in developing sources now are going to find that that the oil that they're going to extract is not even going to be needed because of the changes to sustainable energy, and a lot of that oil is going to be left in the ground. I would hope, as certainly a person concerned about climate change, I would think, how well can we predict the market for future oil and how much there is and that sort of thing? Is this a real science where you can be pretty sure as an economist what's a good investment and where you probably shouldn't? For example, I hope that you will advise people never to develop in the Arctic, oil resources there because of the environmental problem. But I mean, tell me a bit about how predictable the market is and the need for oil in the future with the shift over to sustainable energy.
Okay, may I? I've done quite a lot of my working life in that area. So I'll address to that. I want to say something just before that about the shorter term, and then into this middle, this dream world, which is so difficult. In the immediate term, we have a situation with the world fairly awash in good quality oil. I think the thing about crude oil before it's refined is that all crude oils are not alike. They differ very, very much from one from another. And so sulfur, metals, light, heavy, and they command different prices, and they need different refining techniques. So the world being awash in oil has a profound effect. First of all, it means the countries like China can afford to be picky where they buy. Russia has certainly benefited from this. It means that the oil sands, which they really are bottom of the barrel, have got a big problem. I am of the view, which I may be completely mistaken, but I think so, that Trans Mountain could be a stranded asset, because the question will be, who's going to buy the oil? Why would the Chinese come and buy oil there, which they haven't in the past, when there is a perfectly good jetty, when there's plenty of other oil and the gas we talked about earlier in your program available? That's one thing. The second thought is predictability. How come the governments and oil companies were unable to know beforehand, to guess that there was going to be a price collapse in 2014? They didn't. The International Energy Agency didn't. And I think the answer is, because I've done this with Petro-Canada, with the World Bank, and oil supply demand projections worldwide, trying to look 5 years ahead, let alone 10, is the parameters, the factors at work are just wild. Things you don't know. The world's a very big place. The things that human beings can do, like move to renewables, is something hard to predict. You can push for it, and so there's every room for not knowing. But the trick is to see, where is change happening. You've got 84 windmills offshore.
Oh yes.
I hate looking at them.
Okay. People complain about the noise. I don't know. I've not been up close to one. Yeah, but in another view of the future is, if conflicts are so often intertwined with issues about access to oil or pipelines and so on, then I would think that the development of local autonomous sources of energy, such as, rooftop solar panels, or even those windmills off your coast of Kingston, that having local sources of energy makes people freer of the kinds of conflicts that might lead them into a war. Can you see that, or would you disagree?
Yes, I see locally in rural Ontario, with farms now with solar panels galore suddenly springing up. That's certainly local energy. Let them off the grid or sell back into the grid. I see an independence there. I have a little nagging thing in the back of my head in this world of glut, with powerful countries, Canada, the United States in particular, from their point of view, wanting to see higher oil prices, the good old days of $100 a barrel. Well, to achieve that, they have to knock somebody else's country's oil production off the market. Mm-hmm. Or if it's off the market, they don't exactly bring out a handkerchief and wipe the tears away. I'm thinking of Libya, which since the invasion, which presumably was meant to ease access to foreign investment for oil in that country, is a mess. And so the oil exports are sporadic. Venezuela, we hear about its terrible regime. Canada has joined the United States, the European Union has joined it in putting on sanctions to try and make that regime, that government collapse. It's always a regime if we don't like it, we want to delegitimize it, otherwise it's a government. But the very sanctions that have been put in place make it extremely hard for the Venezuelans to export it. And what I've seen is that their exports, which used to be to Canada, to the eastern refineries, to the United States big time, are being replaced by Canadian, which is excellent from an Albertan point of view, wondering how on earth to market its bitumen, which is the least marketable of the oils. So we have Iran, where the United States wants to reduce its exports to zero. Well, you don't do that in a world which is tough on oil, which needs every drop. You do it where you're trying to knock somebody else off. Mm-hmm. The United States. So I asked the question: are the people in Ottawa, in Calgary, aware of this? That it has this effect? Or are they players in the game and aiding and abetting the United States in this game? How naive are we in reality? Mm-hmm. I don't know. But I certainly intend to ask.
Well, I hope you get an answer, but I wouldn't hold my breath. I don't think they would.
I think people would just look at me and not answer.
Great. John, this has been fascinating, and I certainly want to go get your book as soon as possible because you're dealing with obviously an enormously important phenomenon in modern geopolitics. So I'm really grateful to you for this good little visit, and I want to encourage our viewers to go take a look at some of the other conversations that we've had in these Monday evening talk shows. And you want to go to a website called tosavetheworld.ca. That is the website of a project that I'm deeply involved with called Project Save the World, because we have to save the world from 6 different global threats, and any one of which could wipe out 1 billion people. So this is only kind of tangentially related to, but it's obviously an important part of this particular issue tonight, is only part of one of the great issues facing us about how to save the world from a great number of serious threats, especially wars. And the connections that John has drawn between wars and pipelines is absolutely fascinating. So go have a look at the book and come back and tune in next week as we have another one of these conversations. Thank you, John, and say goodnight to Millie for me.
Thank you so much for inviting me on your program.
Okay.